Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Minister. Let's talk a little bit about policy costs that are trickling through to bills, starting with the carbon tax. So government is understandably concerned about gas prices, the way this will feed through to electricity prices for electricity that's generated through gas. Why hasn't the government taken off the carbon tax to cut the price of gas-powered electricity? And is the government considering that?
Well, it's worth reminding ourselves why the carbon price support exists in the first place. It's introduced to incentivise build of infrastructure that is low carbon, recognising the fact that there is a cost to carbon-intensive infrastructure. It might not be borne immediately, but it is borne in due course. And therefore, on the basis of the polluter pays principle, we should incentivise cleaner sources of energy generation. So that's why the carbon price exists in the first place. Of course, there is also, if we were to remove it, it's not that there ends up being no cost, it's just that it's paid somewhere else in the system, particularly if we've got people trading with the European Union, where obviously they would simply pay that cost to the EU rather than to the UK.
The carbon price support, that's something that's over and above what's levied in EU countries. So why is it that the government doesn't consider removing that element?
Well, as I've just set out, we see it as an important way to lead the decarbonisation that we need to see as a country. It is about recognising that if you take gas generation and put it alongside renewables, there is an additional cost to society of that gas generation that is not otherwise recognised. That was a fairly well-accepted principle until very recently, where those who previously did support it have changed their opinion on it. But it is a really important part of how we build a decarbonised system which benefits everybody.
So given where we are at the minute, acknowledging that around 1/3 of the wholesale price is not to pay for gas, it's this carbon tax, do you acknowledge that if that were to be scrapped, even in the short term, that would have an impact in reducing bills?
No, I don't, because fundamentally the gas would still be more expensive, even without that. I think the comparison I've seen, which I think is what you're referring to, assumes a load factor of gas that we have never run in this country, a load factor of above 90%. That's not how we run gas in this country. So even the equivalent without the carbon tax, I accept is marginally more expensive as opposed to significantly, but it is still more expensive. And you still have the longer term impact of doing that. So to go back to my answer to begin with, there isn't an option here of us sort of standing still. We're going to have to build some new generation. Given the age of a lot of our CCGT fleets, some of it will need refurbished, some of it we would end up needing to build afresh, and the costs then have to be considered for building and operating that, and also, of course, at the moment, with a significantly higher wholesale cost of gas. Now, the assumption, I think, from those who think that is the better option to take is that, well, don't worry because the price might come down again in the future. But of course, that's not a system we want to build. We want to build one that has longer term certainty for consumers, not one that gambles that it might come down at some point.
So given the the pressure on bills, particularly at the minute, and the volatility that we're facing, the carbon tax and the carbon price support element, is that something that the government will consider looking at in the future, or is the government absolutely committed to that, or will it consider removing that from bills?
Look, I said earlier on, we're looking at absolutely everything, but there are some fundamentals that there simply isn't a way to go around, and so we're not looking at completely changing the government's policy on recognising the price of carbon.
Do you categorically rule that out?
Well, I've said we're looking at a whole range of policies. I'm not going to be drawn on one particular thing that I'm sure will be, after this meeting, quoted in a particular way. What I'm saying is we're looking at a whole range of options to reduce bills, but the principle that carbon has a cost and that it's paid for by society is fundamental to what this government believes, and we're not going to move away from that.
So, final question, Chair. You think in this climate, with the pressure on bills that we're facing, the volatility, that it's fair for that to remain?
I think in this climate, the lesson that we should take is that fossil fuels have been the cause of why consumers are paying more across the country. And anyone that, I think, with a straight face can say right now that the answer is to double down on gas as an answer to our future energy security and to the bills crisis that people are facing, I think needs to look very carefully about where they're getting their information from. The truth is, we're living right now through not just one example, but only 4 years after the last example of where exposure to fossil fuels is costing people across the country. The faster we can move away from that, the better we are for our energy security, for the future of our planet, which I think actually really matters, but also the opportunity to create jobs across the country as well. So that is the path to be on. And I think, moments like this, you do take lessons from whether you're on the right track or not. I think clearly this is a really distressing time for people across the country. We want to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East as quickly as possible, but it is also the moment to take the lesson that says this is the right path for the country and we should build it even faster to make sure that we protect consumers now and long into the future.